Hey, welcome to Woke the channel. This is where we go deep down the esoteric rabbit hole. This is the real kind of woke, not that fake-ass cultural Marxism woke. And if you want to get an idea of what we go into in this channel, I suggest that you check out a movie that I made earlier this year called Woke the Movie. And I would describe it as sort of esoteric conspiracy theory for dummies. It's kind of a movie that even normies could watch, and they could sort of get these complicated concepts that we're going to be talking about in this channel. But before we dig into the occult, the Satanism, and what might also be an alien agenda, it's important to understand the concept of fabricated history. Basically, the story of how we think we got here is a fable and something else much different actually happened. You'll see in a lot of this occult stuff that you might be learning about right now is that it has its roots in ancient mystery schools. And it's my strong belief that a lot of this occulted knowledge was knowledge of ancient civilizations. These civilizations sort of died out, and they were kind of hidden from the normal idea of history, but this knowledge has been passed on through secret societies and elite circles. So before we get into what that knowledge is in later videos down the road, we're going to look at this lost civilization. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is sort of the evidence. Like what I do in this channel and what I try to do in Woke the Movie is not just tell you a story, but give you the evidence that builds that story and sort of contradicts the story that we've been told before. Now, like anybody raised in public school, and if you weren't in like a strict religious family where you were taught something else, most of us were taught a more or less linear progression of life on this planet, and a linear progression of culture by human beings. And according to the academic narrative, you had ice ages, natural catastrophes, diseases that may have occasionally bumped us down as humanity a peg or two. But if you look at the time we were supposedly nomadic hunter-gatherers to today, probably about 8,000 years, you'll see a rather linear progression of technological advancement. Basically, agriculture developed 8,000 years ago, also the domestication of animals. You have ancient Sumer about 6,000 years ago, and they developed historical records, writing, a lot of government systems. And Sumer was really the start of history. So everything before Sumer is kind of considered prehistoric, and anything going forward is history. And from there we move to the more advanced kingdoms like Egypt, where they got papyrus, advanced construction techniques, a complex and centralized religious system, and really solidifying this idea of empire. After that, you have sort of the Greeks who built on what the Egyptians did, then the Romans built on Greece, then you sort of have this Dark Age hiccup, where a lot of this knowledge was supposedly lost. Then we move into the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, the Industrial Revolution, the Age of Scientism, kind of with Darwin, and today we have digital technology. Here we are, the crown of creation, and as far as we know, there has not been a living thing on this planet, or even in this solar system, that has achieved what we have achieved. Or maybe not. And my whole point of even doing this is to show that this story is very likely incorrect. That our progress is not linear, it's cyclical. And humans, or what we think of as humans, have risen and fallen on this planet God knows how many times. And I can prove that very convincingly with the evidence that at least once, humanity, or maybe not exactly humanity as we know it, but something similar, was at a high level of sophistication. It might even possess knowledge and technology that exceeds what we know now. Technology not necessarily in terms of circuits or microchips, but rather an understanding of natural laws of the universe. They might have had understanding of the very fabric of reality that's beyond what 99% of us understand today. So for today, I want to focus on the evidence that intelligent life on this planet was at a certain level of sophistication. Then that knowledge was lost, somehow, some way, cataclysms, war, disease, something. And humanity as we know it had to build back, essentially on the carcass of this previous civilization. And this civilization was not included in our official story of history, even though the evidence of it has been staring us in the face for hundreds of years. And if you really want to dig into this subject, you can check out my previous videos on ancient Egypt and the worldwide pyramid phenomena, which I also believe is evidence that humans were working with lost and advanced knowledge. So one way that we know that there was a world-connected culture are the similarities in construction styles across continents. Now, I've talked on this channel before about Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It was basically discovered in the 1960s. It's not fully excavated, but what's been unearthed so far makes it the largest megalithic site ever. Archaeologists believe that it was built around 13,000 years ago, or at least that's when it was buried. It could be much older. But at the latest date that it was supposedly built, human beings were supposedly just hunter-gatherers. I mean, this thing is older than the wheel. Supposedly it's older than agriculture. It's been around longer than we figured out how to domesticate animals. And there's plenty of interesting things about the site, but if you want to know more, do your own research. But we were taught that this was a hunter-gatherer construction. But if we travel about 1,300 miles away on the island nation of Malta, just a little south of Sicily, there's this place called Gigantia, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, but it looks very, very similar to Göbekli Tepe. We got these giant T-shaped pillars, and these walls made of smaller stones. But according to the experts, this thing is about 5,500 years old. But you have to ask, just by looking at it, is it just a coincidence? Or was there some unexplained shared cultural knowledge in these construction techniques? You have more perplexing similarities found between ancient Egypt and the Americas, namely Mexico and South America. See, if you know your history, you've heard that these cultures developed in different times and had no contact with each other whatsoever, and that transatlantic travel did not happen until the 1400s pretty much. But let's look at some of these similarities. So we got this unique cutting style in the rocks, and also you got these odd notches, which are actually present on megalithic sites all over the world, not just Egypt, not just South America. And also around the world, and in Egypt and in South America, you find these poured metal fasteners that connect the stones together. Very similar looking technique, and as you can see, it's done all over the place on monuments that were constructed when nobody had any contact with one another. Supposedly, they just developed this technique independently. Let's go to the east coast of Mexico, where you have the very old Olmec civilization. You might recognize these giant heads as being associated with Olmecs, and this is one of the oldest known cultures in the Americas, existing around the same time as the Egyptian pharaohs. But again, no contact between these cultures. But then look at some of these Olmec statues, and the headdresses look obviously Egyptian. Also, both the Olmecs and the Egyptians practiced cranial elongation, something you could find more about in Woke the Movie, and I also clipped out the segment from the movie in its own video. So if you just want to learn about cranial elongation, you could just find that video on my channel. Now let's go over to Easter Island. You got this megalithic wall built by a Polynesian culture, settled from the Far East. Then you have this style over Peru, not settled by the Polynesians. Supposedly they were settled by nomadic hunter-gatherers making their way over the Bering Strait, down through the Americas, down through Mexico, and into South America. But yet you got this remarkably similar wall. And also you got these statues in the Peruvian Sacred Valley, kind of reminiscent of the Moai on Easter Island. But again, no contact between these cultures. And I also want to look at another way ancient sites are misrepresented by archaeologists and historians. Basically, there are sites all over the world that are attributed to a given ancient culture, and we're told that they were built over a relatively small amount of time, but what you actually see, we get something that looks like it was built by many cultures, with wildly varying construction techniques. And what appears to be the oldest elements of these constructions are almost always the most well-built and technologically advanced. And what you're seeing here is a decrease in building ability over time. And I'll show you what I mean. We're going to start off with Machu Picchu in Peru. Officially, it was built over a period about 10 years for the Emperor Pachacuti. I know I'm butchering that. And it was built in the mid-1400s and abandoned about 100 years later when the Spanish started showing up. So it was built relatively quickly. You can see two different styles of construction. You have large, precisely cut stone blocks on the bottom, older portion. Then a relatively sloppy cobbling together. Looks obviously like repair work, done by a culture that didn't have the ability to do this finer work. And the quote-unquote experts have explained that this is basically two styles, a mix of imperial style and a standard quality style, but still this was all done within 10 years. But I think they're just guessing, because who in their right mind would actually build something like this? There's also another way to prove that explanation wrong. If you look at the older, larger, and more tightly fitting blocks, you can see that there's a separation running from east to west. And this is from a massive earthquake. And any earthquake large enough to cause that sort of separation would surely topple the smaller rock constructions on top. It would only make sense that this damage was already here before this other stuff was built on top of it. But hey, what do I know? So another place you see something similar is not too far away. It's a site known as Ollantaytambo. I don't know how the double L is pronounced here, but Ollantaytambo, Ollantaytambo. So this was built around the same time as Machu Picchu for the same Incan emperor, and these large terraces were most likely Inca built, but the place is also littered with these large, precisely cut and precisely placed blocks. So the contrast is so extreme that it's almost kind of laughable for an archaeologist to claim that this was all done by the same culture. Again, less sophisticated reconstruction on an older, much better built site. And I gotta say, what the hell scattered all these blocks around? So just to drive this point home, we're gonna look at this place in Peru. I forgot what this was called, but here you have a Spanish church on top of an Incan stone construction on top of this older megalithic construction. Now, imagine if archaeologists 1,000 years ago came to this site, maybe they dug some dirt out, maybe it was covered in dirt, but what if their conclusion was that all this was all built in about 10 years by the same culture? That's basically what we're being told. And before we wrap things up, I'm going to look at one more site thousands of miles away. We're going to go back to Malta, and this is a Spanish fortress. We were told this was all constructed in the 1500s, but I'm going to claim that this star-shaped excavation was done much, much earlier, and the Spanish just occupied and built this fort on top of it. First of all, look at this excavation. Was this all done with shovels and pickaxes? Does it fit the MO of how 16th century Spaniards built forts? It's a total overkill. But aside from that, you can see more evidence that this was a place that more than one culture built upon. And from the looks of it, these cultures were separated not by 100, not by 200, but by thousands of years. You can see all these small halls and caves that were covered up by the same stone blocks in the Spanish fortress. So why would the Spanish excavate all these cubby holes just to cover them up? Again, it makes much more sense that this was repair work. And why would you need to repair something you just built? Also, you can see the Star Fort structure is actually eroding right here. And obviously it didn't look like that when it was built. This erosion was something that happened over a long period of time. But you can see that this Spanish wall was built to contour the erosion, which means the side of this Star Fort had to be already eroded before the Spanish started construction. Booyah. And finally, even in Malta's official, academically backed version of history, there's some very old constructions here. You have the Hypogeum, which is this massive underground complex, which we're told is about 4,500 years old, which would make it a contemporary of ancient Egypt. You also have Gigantea, which we are told is around the same age, but looks very similar to the 13,000-year-old Göbekli Tepe. And next to this Spanish fort, you have this ruin, which officials have dated back to being about as old as the Roman Empire, and it's highly eroded. Now let me ask you, what do your eyes see? Does this giant star fort resemble the sort of construction techniques used to create this old Roman Empire ruin? Or does it look more similar to the 16th century Spanish fort? I'll let you decide that. So that's all for today, just some food for thought. And if you like this content and you're really feeling adventurous, I suggest watch Woke the movie. It's quite a doozy. It's something I worked on off and on for 3 years. I put it out earlier this year, and I think it goes a little further than most people are ready for. It keeps getting weirder and weirder as it goes on. You know, I like the book Heart of Darkness and also the movie version Apocalypse Now. And I like how it's sort of structured, where you kind of start off in a place of normalcy. Then as you get on the boat and go further down the river, things get stranger and stranger, and you're further away from the world you once knew. So that was kind of the structure I had in mind when making this. It gets really over the top the more you go into it. And it's a good educational tool if you want to understand conspiracy culture, even if you're not really a conspiracy theorist. I think I do a pretty clear job of explaining conspiracy narratives and the evidence that a lot of, quote, conspiracy theorists have put forward to justify these ideas. And it also kind of goes into how different conspiracies might exist under a larger umbrella of truth. I'll leave a link in the description. Check it out. I'm not saying you're going to believe or accept everything there, but it does explain a lot of complex esoteric concepts in a very easy to understand format. So check it out. I could use the views and the feedback. But that's all for me. Have a great day, and I hope you enjoyed this. Please like, subscribe, and share, and I'll catch you on the next one.